Good morning. I met some of you as you walked in, but I want to introduce myself. I am Sabrina Pape, and I am lucky enough to be the Dean of the Library and the Learning Resource Center at Sierra. And I apologize for reading from my notes. I'm really bad at kind of ad hoc speaking, so I have some notes because I'm afraid I'll forget something. But it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the Sierra Writers Conference at Rocklin. Thank you all for joining us at this event that supports and celebrates writers and writing, but also provides a venue for the coming together of the college and the community. Gives me great joy also to know that that Sierra Community College is serving as an inspirational, intellectual center for that coming together. Where is there a better place to have a writers' conference than a college campus? Putting on a conference, though, takes lots of dedicated people, giving of their time and energy. So if you could indulge me a bit as I thank some of those amazing people. First, to Lynette Verman. There she is. Without whom this conference would not happen. Her hours of work, her gentle reminders, and her organizational mind were crucial to the success of this conference. And I do want to say personally, I feel really lucky to have gotten to know her through this. I also want to thank our community members who helped us produce this conference. Hawk Choa, Catherine Bramkamp, Rachel Tefferet, and in particular Lisa Redfern for the enormous amount of work she has done developing the Sierra Writers Conference website. At Sierra College, so many of our staff also worked over the past year to assist us in bringing this conference to fruition. Among them, my assistant April Cadron, who was out at the check-in desk, Sierra College Press editor and emeritus faculty member Joe Medeiros, and faculty members Chris Hall, Michelle Johnson, Ingrid Kariotis, Ivan Laurie, and Carolyn Crane. And finally, a grateful thank you to our wonderful writers for being with us today. Pam Houston, Grant Faulkner, Kim Culbertson, Gary Noy, Rachel Dodge, Randy White, Ingrid Kariotis, Rachel Tefferet. And I want to make sure to send a happy shout out and warm welcome to the Sierra College students in attendance. Where are you? Yay! Thank you. This is great. Enjoy the conference and keep writing. So I'm also going to tell you some logistics, because I don't know, I guess I'm in charge of logistics, but I will see if I don't forget something. First, bathrooms right outside, men's and women's. Second, the Sierra Press, which is a sponsor of this event, which has really helped us with the finances associated with the Sierra Writers, and is as a partner with the Sierra Writers, is going to be selling books. And it is in 106 right across the way. Check that out at the breaks if you can. There's some wonderful books there. We are live tweeting. Our hashtag is SWC2020. She's waving there. If you are lost or have questions, there are people with yellowish volunteer name tags. Just ask one of them. And don't ask me, no, ask them. I'll be around too, and my assistant April will as well. Let's see, lunch, for those of you with a red star on your name tag, you signed up for a lunch. The lunch will be in the LRC building, which is the library building, big, tall building. We will have some student volunteers sort of directing you there, but we thought it was a nice day to take a nice walk over there. And you're also welcome, if you didn't buy the lunch, you just want to eat lunch, to go over there. There's a cafe, and there's some nice places to sit, but also it's probably going to be pretty nice outside, too. I really need sun, for sure. I think some of you picked up a brochure from the Sierra Journal. We're looking for submissions. February 29th is our deadline. That's our literary magazine. And it is a sort of community college magazine, and I appreciate if you take a look at that and contribute if you'd like to. Let's see, what else? Rooms for the breakouts are on this floor, so you don't have to go very far for the breakouts. Anybody who needs an agenda, who hasn't gotten an agenda, we still have more. Anything else I'm supposed to say? Trying to think. Okay. I think I got everything. This is the agenda. We don't have agendas for the Nevada County, which is tomorrow, but next year we will. Yeah. And now I'm going to, hoping that Carolyn Crane will come up and introduce or step down and introduce our first speaker. Enjoy. Okay, I need to do transfer. So we can click that.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. It's an honor to introduce Pam Houston. Pam is an internationally acclaimed author of 6 books: the iconic short story collection Cowboys Are My Weakness, a collection of essays, 3 novels, and most recently her memoir Deep Creek, Finding Hope in the High Country. Deep Creek is now number 9 on the National Indie Books bestseller list. Deep Creek is named after a creek on Pam's 120-acre High Meadow Ranch in Colorado. Metaphorically, the title encompasses her 26-year journey from a young adrenaline junkie adventurer to a grown-up teacher, a grown-up rancher, a dedicated teacher, and a woman deeply in love with animals, the earth, and life itself. Pam is here this morning to share with you how to incorporate the physical objects around you meaningfully into your writing. Please join me in welcoming Pam Houston. Maybe you'll have better luck than I did.
Do I need this for the video, sir? Yes. I need this for the video.
Oh, no.
Okay. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's lovely to be here. I'm going to start out by reading you one page of my recent book, Deep Creek, because it's going to illustrate everything that I'm going to say after that. This is a page near the end, but it doesn't give anything away. I made it. It's called Almanac. It's as beautiful a thing as I have ever known, living inside the ranch's almanac. How the weather shapes and dictates our lives, not just during a blizzard, but in every season. How the Leonids always follow the Perseids. How the monsoon always follows fire season. How wood follows hay, and lambs follow the draining of the pasture. How lupin follows paintbrush, which follows phlox, which follows iris, which follows the arrival of the bluebirds, which follows the last day of below zero cold. There's the way the sun warms the house right after sunrise through the east-facing kitchen windows. There's the smell of 250 bales of fresh hay in the barn on a warm September afternoon, and the colors in the sky over Bristol Head at dusk. A good bed of coals in the wood stove. A pot of Hungarian mushroom soup on the range. The fuchsia blooms of the skyrocket on either side of the driveway. A coyote pausing, 1 foot in the air, crossing my pasture feet deep in snow. The smell of lanolin rising off the sheep. 5 elk beds near the creek in the back acreage still holding warmth from the vacated elk. The tiny tracks of mice in the snow. Roni, impatient for carrots, staring me down through the kitchen window on a frigid January morning. Orion, so bright and close outside my bedroom window in February, it's as if he's waiting for an invitation. The barn, always the barn, and its roofline against the blue of the mountain. The Milky Way, appearing nightly, and milky above me. Moonglow on Pinkley's cabin, on the barn roof, on the snow in the pasture on a midnight cross-country ski. The screech of a redtail, the hoot of a barn owl, the high singing of a coyote, the bugle of an elk or some other wild thing calling. A silence so big I can hear my own silence inside it. These are only a few of the ways the ranch mothers me. Thank you. So, what did you notice about that? What was it full of? Details? Animals. Sensory details, yeah. Nouns, right? It was full of stuff, right? It was full of nouns. I'm a big fan of nouns. I am always saying to my students, more nouns. I am a big fan of the physical stuff of the world. Every object, every physical object in the world carries with it all kinds of meaning. And it is our opportunity to bring that meaning to the page in the form of the physical world. All of my work begins in the physical, concrete world, in my sensory experience of that world. And when my very first job as a writer is to notice with all of my senses what's happening around me. My first job as a writer, I am absolutely certain, is to move through the world with all of my senses open and available to what I'm experiencing. And what I'm looking for as I move through the world, as I move through the physical world, are something that I call glimmers. It's a stupid word. I've been using it for 30 years. It's stuck to me now. I can't get rid of it. And the reason I shouldn't say it's stupid. It's an inadequate word because for one thing, it sounds pretty and it sounds ephemeral or momentary, and I don't mean any of those things. But what I'm looking for as I move through the world is something that arrests my attention, that says, hey, writer, over here, this is for you, pay attention. And in that arresting of my attention, I believe there's resonance, there's a feeling of resonance, like this is somehow here for me, this thing that I'm watching, this elk, this bed, this recently vacated elk bed where I can still feel the warmth of the elk, the coyote crossing my pasture lifting one foot. It doesn't have to be something beautiful and natural. It can be a mother backhanding her kid in the line at Walmart. It can be the shine, the late afternoon shine on the surface of a very cold river. It can be the eruption of a geyser. I come to you recently from Yellowstone Park. It can be the eruption of Old Faithful at midnight when I'm the only one out there. It could be a line of dialogue overheard anywhere. It could be a crash on the freeway. It could be anything at all. But anything that arrests your attention, that you feel this little vibration in your chest of resonance, what that vibration means to me is that this piece of the outside landscape, this piece of the exterior landscape, is going to unlock something in my interior landscape. This thing, this object, this noun, this set of nouns is going to help me tell my story. So what I do as a writer first is I collect these glimmers. I write them down. I commit them to memory, which isn't so great anymore. Mostly I write them down. I write them in my phone. I write them on my computer. I don't worry about what they go in or what they lead to. The point is to collect them. The point is to have really good raw materials. It's like, I'm going to make a great soup for dinner, and I'm going to buy all organic vegetables to do it. I'm going to start with good stuff. I'm going to start with good raw materials, and I can hardly go wrong with the soup. If I start with really fresh organic vegetables, I can hardly screw it up, right? And that's how I feel about this process. If I start with all of these resonant glimmers, if they become the stuff of my story, then all I have to do is stay out of their way. All I have to do is combine them in ways that hopefully, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, make them add up to more than the sum of their parts. So first step is collecting these glimmers, anything that resonates with you. And of course, I do this on a daily basis, but also when I sit down to write, I might go way back in time to glimmers, things, resonant images that haunt me or stay with me. That's often where trauma comes from, right? These resonant images that haunt you and stay with you. There's a scene in Deep Creek about my mother washing a skirt. I went home I was a grad student, so in other words, I was very poor, and I bought this skirt for more than I could afford at an art fair, and it was this hand-painted skirt, and it was beautiful, and it was a piece of art, really, and I took it home, and my mother said it made me look fat, and she snuck in my room in the middle of the night and washed it in hot water, which faded all the colors, and then took in the waistband because she thought that would help me be more attractive in her mind. And so of course it became a skirt I couldn't wear. And anyway, that's neither here nor there. It's kind of a perfect metaphor for my relationship with my mother. But it really is. It's absolutely exactly. And that glimmer has been in my computer for like 26 years, And I didn't write it exactly when it happened, but I wrote it much later to go into another story. It fell out of that story. It lived in my computer for all these years. It found its way into this book like 30 years later because it went with another glimmer, which much less obvious. It went with this can of UV protector. I have to protect my logs of my house at 9,000 feet every single fall. I have to cover the logs. My whole house is made out of logs. It's not a very big house, but the whole thing is made of logs. I have to cover those logs with UV protector every year, or the UV will just eat my house. And the instructions on the can are like, you can't apply this at temperatures below 40 degrees if there's any chance of dew, if there's any chance of snow or rain. It's impossible to follow the directions on that can. It always gets below 40 degrees at my house at night. I live at 9,000 feet. There's always dew unless we're in a terrible drought. The only time it doesn't get below 40 degrees is when we're in the monsoon, which of course isn't good for the UV protector either. And there was something about that can that went exactly metaphorically with my mother washing that skirt. The impossibilities of those two situations. This is my mother. She has to be. I have to protect my house. I can't possibly follow the directions. I'm not going to get it right no matter what I do. Like all that time, that scene with that skirt, that glimmer with the skirt was waiting for that can of UV protector. And they come together in an essay in this book. Okay, that's what I'm about as a writer. That in a nutshell. I am about putting together unlike objects and seeing how they inform each other, seeing how they make each other's meaning expand or pop or stretch. And honestly, I have never written anything, including a book review, including an article on like my 7 favorite ski runs at Park City, whatever. I've never written anything that I haven't used this method that I'm describing. Even when I'm not sort of free-form writing like I am in the way I just described with the UV protector and the skirt, even when I have a real assignment, I'm still saying, like if I get an assignment, write an article, a 3,000-word article about women and ambition. Well, I'm back in my computer looking for, okay, is this glimmer about women and ambition? Is this glimmer about women and ambition? And of course, I'm always trying to stretch those boundaries. So why? Why do I do it this way? There are 3 reasons I'll give you why this method has worked for me for now, these 30-something years, and continues to work and continues to give me what I need as an artist. First reason, readers love to have their senses activated. That's a fact. Styles change, things get minimal, things get maximal, things get emo or not. But the fact is, readers love to have their senses activated. That has been true for all time. Readers love to feel that they're in the moment with you. They're smelling the smells, tasting the tastes, seeing the sights, hearing the dialogue, right? Readers are more engaged when their senses are activated. Now, we've been saying that since probably William Carlos Williams and before, right? No thoughts but in things, said Williams Carlos Williams. Show don't tell, said every writing professor who has ever lived until they're blue in the face, right? So we've been saying that a long time, but brain science, relatively recent brain science, has backed that up in a really interesting way. And I have a friend named B.K. Lauren, a wonderful writer, who gives a great talk on this. And I think it's online. B.K. Lauren is her name, if you want to check it out, because it's fascinating in terms of, like, especially if you're a writing teacher, which I'm sure there are some in this room, who say show don't tell all the time. It's a fascinating talk for you to see. But my 15-second version of the talk is that if they put nodes on somebody's brain and they're reading a passage where there's a baseball player standing at home plate, and he's got the bat on his shoulder, and he's watching the pitcher's hand, and all of a sudden the pitcher rears back and that ball comes out of the pitcher's hand at 95 miles an hour, and he gets ready to swing and he tenses up his bat. When you're reading that passage, you are all but swinging. Your body, your brain is all lit up, purple and red. You're in fight or flight mode. You're engaged on a cellular level when you're reading that action, when you're reading that active scene full of nouns, right? If you're reading the intellectual history of gaming in America and why baseball captured America's heart, and it's full of abstractions, and it's full of, intellectual wanderings and emotional contextualization of why we love baseball as a country. That may be really interesting to you, but your brain is like one little gray blip going like, You should see it. It's fascinating when you actually see the difference of a paragraph full of abstractions versus a paragraph full of nouns and action and smells and tastes and sights. That's what I mean when I say nouns. So reason number one, readers get more involved with their whole bodies when you're using lots of concrete physical detail. Reason number two for this glimmer method, and this may apply more to me than to everyone in the world, but I believe deeply that if you don't invite the subconscious to the art-making party, you're not really making art, okay? The conscious mind can do a lot of things organizationally. Your analytical mind can solve problems in your piece at the revision stage. But if you don't invite your subconscious to the initial drafting, you're not going to have something that's as good as if you do. I mean, because the subconscious, so much of what our stories mean lurks in our self-conscious, and we don't even know what they mean. And so the glimmer method for me is a way to kind of do an end around my conscious brain. It's a way to say, okay, I'm going to put this can of UV protector next to this skirt, and whoa, look what happened. It's a way for me to write sort of intuition first. It was my intuition that led me to that glimmer in the first place, and I'm going to trust my intuition and bring it to the page and bring it with other things that my intuition led me to and see what happens when I bring them all together. That's very different for me than if I say, I'm going to write a story about, okay? My analytical brain, I got a pretty good analytical brain, less good than it used to be, but it's pretty good. I used to be able to do those lawyer problems in my head for the LSAT. So it's pretty good. The problem with our analytical brains and art making is that what is the main job of our analytical brains? It's to tell us that everything's okay. That's what our analytical brains do all the time. It's okay. Yeah, we just lost a big one in the Senate last night, but that's all right. We're going to get to the polls, and we're going to educate people, and I had to get that second mortgage on my house, but it's okay because I'm going to pick up extra work this summer. No, we haven't had any snow this year, but that's all right because fire season, there's going to be okay, that's what our analytical brains do all day long. They tell us everything's going to be okay. And we don't really want our art to do that. I don't want my art to do that. I don't want my art to reassure anybody that everything's okay. I want my art to be more like the person who runs out in the middle of traffic and takes all their clothes off and says, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. I want my art to be a little out of control, or sometimes a lot out of control. I want my art to be written, or at least conceived or drafted out of that screaming brain. that brain that knows I'm going to die, that everyone I love is going to die, frickin' climate catastrophe, all that grief and joy and wonder at the world. I want my first draft to come out of that. And to me, that's those glimmers. That's that recognition of myself in the physical world, bringing it to the page, trusting that I can put a can of UV protector next to my mother washing a skirt a long time ago that for some reason I still think about all the time, and something good will happen, okay? As opposed to logic or chronology, which I don't trust. I believe those are both constructions. I'm not saying I don't employ them. I'm not saying that I don't write a story and 6 drafts later go, you know what, chronology might have been good. Maybe I'll try that. I'm not saying I won't use the tools, but it's kind of like New Age medicine versus Western medicine. Like every now and then you just got to take some antibiotics, but you try with your ear thing and your drops. So I want to try with all the intuitive ways before I fall back on the penicillin, right? And I don't always fall back on the penicillin. A lot of times those drops and that ear candling and all that stuff really actually gets you over your sinus infection and you don't have to take antibiotics. And that's how I feel about this sort of intuitive, nonlinear, non-chronological, non-logical writing process. It often yields to unexpected, surprising combinations of things that actually turn out really well. I'll give you one more example of that, what I'm talking about with the unconscious brain. Some years ago, I was giving a talk at the library in Sun Valley, Idaho, and after my talk, there was a party at a fancy person's house. It was a Valentine's Day cocktail party in my honor. If you can possibly imagine 3 clauses that would make anybody feel the most uncomfortable ever, especially someone who doesn't drink. So I go to this Valentine's Day cocktail party in my honor, and it's at a house, a beautiful house, you can imagine, in Sun Valley, Idaho. And I walk in, and they have this like Himalayan sheep sculpture in the doorway, and the first thing my dog lifts his leg, and because it looked like a sheep. Anyway, it was an art piece. But so that's how the evening started. But in any case, I get into the cocktail party, and there's a caterer, and it's very fancy, and the caterer has frozen a big bottle. There's a sculpture in the middle of the catering table, and it's an ice block shaped like a bottle with a bottle of Kettle One in the center that you can see, and then there's the heads of a dozen red roses, like frozen into the ice, right? It's the caterer's flourish, right? Well, I can't take my eyes off that bottle. I'm walking around it, I'm having awkward cocktail party conversation, and my eyes keep going to it. I finally take out my camera and take a picture of it, because I know it's a glimmer, but I don't know what it means. I'm just like, I can't take my eyes off that bottle. So I go home, I've got the picture in my camera, I write a couple of sentences about the bottle, and then I go on with my life. A few years later, I'm writing a story called Maggie on the Road. And Maggie's a former prison therapist, psychologist, and she's on a tiny plane going from Boston to Saranac Lake, New York. She's the only one because there's a blizzard and everybody else is canceled. So it's only a 9-seater to begin with, a 9-seater Cape Air, a little prop plane. But it's just her and the pilot. And like he's sitting there and she's sitting here. And the sky's getting darker and darker and darker and darker. And she notices that the plane is getting coated with ice. And he's like doing his income taxes or something on his lap. And finally the ice gets so thick on the nose of the plane that it starts to kind of break off. This is another glimmer. In case you didn't get this really happened to me. But in this case, it's happening to my character Maggie. And the ice is getting so thick on the nose and the struts and stuff, it's starting to break off. And you can hear it, like running like mice along the fuselage. And he hasn't acknowledged, the pilot hasn't acknowledged Maggie's presence in any way. And finally she says, hey, that's not right. is it? She says. And he swings his big head around and looks up from his taxes, and he says, you know, the plane has a mechanism that is supposed to help it shed ice. But if the storm's too bad, the mechanism can't keep up. And then he just goes back to his taxes. And then Maggie waits, and she waits, and she waits, and then he turns around again and he says, you know, I had to make a decision about 10 minutes ago whether to go back to Logan or to go on to Saranac Lake, and now we're committed. And I believe, because of the way the temperatures are, if I turn the nose down really sharply and dive into the warmer air, it'll pop the ice right off. And in that moment that this is happening to me in real life, I knew that was a glimmer. Because, you know, ice on the plane is a glimmer pretty much for everybody, but also because of that moment that he decided to be a human being with me. He made a decision. You know, he wasn't going to tell me that, and then he was. And he was like, well, you know, whatever chance there was that we were going to die together, we were going to do it together. And then I knew I had a story, you know. And so, but when I was writing the story, okay, when I'm writing the story, Maggie on the Road, I need something to happen in those 3 seconds or 3 minutes or however long it was of his decision making. So I go into my computer and I do ice. And hey, there's my bottle. It comes right up. I had forgotten about it because it had been a few years. But up comes my bottle. I type in ice in my Glimmer file, which is just completely chaos. And here comes that bottle. And so I write, one time Maggie was invited to a cocktail party on Valentine's Day in her honor. And there was a bottle on the table. And so I put that bottle in that spot of his pause between the first time he talked to me and the second time he talked to me. And in that putting of the bottle in that story, which was just a try, it might not have worked, I didn't know, but I was giving it a try, right? I realized, of course, what the bottle was. And it was a little depressing, I'll tell you why. I realized why I was attracted to that bottle, why that bottle was a glimmer for me. And the reason was, and it's so obvious, it's embarrassing that I didn't know it at the time, my mom, back to my mom, everything always goes back to my mom, and she was a terrible alcoholic, severe alcoholic. She drank vodka by the bottle, not Kettle One. And she was also a stage actress. And our house was therefore always full of red roses because she was constantly getting roses backstage. And so there was my frozen dead mother, you know, on the table at this cocktail party. I mean, no wonder I couldn't take my eyes off of it. There was the vodka and the ice, because she was a little icy, and you know, the red roses. I mean, it was literally my mother. And so when I realized that, only when I brought that glimmer to the page, I was like, oh, could one thing be not about my mother? But then I wrote that line. I said, Maggie wished that just one thing, you know, could not be. Maggie would be happy if nothing was ever about her mother again. And so I was able to use that scene in the middle, and then the guy turns around and says, you know, we're going to do this together, essentially. I mean, of course, he didn't say that, but that was the gist of what he said. So that's how the glimmers work. That's a really clear-cut example of how I'm attracted to a glimmer, I write it down, I save it, and then it comes back and reveals itself. The object of this game is not necessarily for the glimmers to reveal themselves. Like, I have plenty of glimmers that have gone ahead and went into stories that I still don't know why. And it could be possible that I would never know why that ice bottle was, you know, meaningful to me. But I would trust that it was. And I might have put it in that story and left it there even if I didn't know it was about my mother. You know, it was ice and ice. And for that reason, they went together. And that's the way the mind works. You know, the mind doesn't just work logically or chronologically, is kind of the subtext of everything I'm saying today. It also works associatively. And sometimes those associative connections, like when we read great poetry, can be so much more powerful for the reader than logic or chronology, because the reader can't quite follow it. They don't know why it feels amazing, that there's an orange kite in the sky and that was your grandmother's favorite color and that reminds you for some reason of cheesesteak hoagies on the boardwalk in New Jersey. Those weird side slides can be what's so exciting and beautiful in writing because we can't quite get our hands around them. We can't quite logic them. We can't be like, oh, that's why, I don't know. Has anybody here been in therapy? Just kidding. I've been in therapy, and now I forgot what I was going to say. It's like in therapy. In therapy, when I first started going to therapy, this is hundreds of years ago. When I first started going to therapy, the therapist would say, predictably, well, and how did you feel when she did that? And I would be like, well, it's because. I didn't know what she was, and he's like, no, but how did you feel when she did that? And I would be like, well, the reason is that blah, 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 blah. We love reason. Like reason is so safe. And so is logic. But these feelings we can't quite understand that are contradictory with each other, how we feel is so hard to know and express. And the danger with expressing your feelings is that you'll locate them all in abstractions. And like, what is your pain? What is your grief? What is your sorrow compared to the reader's? But if you sink those feelings down into the object, if you sink those feelings into that ice block with the red roses and the Kettle One, then the reader gets to experience them. It's like a cable message being scrambled, right? Like there's the thing, and the camera takes a picture of it, and then the cable message gets scrambled, and then the thing comes out the other side more clear. If you sink the emotion into the physical object, the reader can access it directly, as opposed to through a veil of abstractions that you might use to talk about your feelings. That's kind of next level for me, so I kind of went down a road there. But, okay, reason number three. Reason number three that this method works for me. Really simple reason. It's possible. For me, if I were going to say, I'm going to start my new novel tomorrow, I would do anything to avoid that. I would do delicate loads of laundry. I would get after that bathroom tile. I would go on a hike. I would fix my fences that haven't been fixed in 15 years. I would do anything rather than start my novel tomorrow. But if I were going to say, all right, I'm just going to do a little glimmer dump. I'm just going to get down the glimmers from my recent trip to Yellowstone, all those beautiful geysers and all that beautiful water, and thinking about all that alongside all these environmental degradations the current administration is forcing upon us. I'm just going to just write down some of the buffalo with the driving his head through the snow. I'm just going to get down a few of those glimmers. Then it seems possible. Like, I don't have to really write today. I just have to get down those glimmers. And then once I'm sitting in the chair, it's not so bad. Like for me, it's getting down into the chair that's the hardest part of writing. Once I'm there and I start to write the glimmers, and then I think, oh, that reminds me of that other time those elk were, and then I'm looking through my files, and all of a sudden I've got some buffaloes driving their head through the snow, and I got some glimmers, and I got the color of the water in the magnolia pool that reminds me of the color of the water in the Bahamas, and then some iguanas. And the next thing you know, I'm bringing my nouns together, and I'm kind of having fun. And I try really hard not to put any pressure on myself in that early writing. Like this doesn't have to be a story. I'm just juggling balls here. I'm just juggling glimmers. I got a chainsaw, an apple, and a toaster, and I'm just gonna see how it goes. And maybe the chainsaw doesn't work out, Maybe it's actually a Volkswagen that I'm juggling, with my toaster and my apple. But I'm just gonna play, because the more I can make it like play, the more time I'll spend in it, the more time I'm engaged. And another thing I said really quickly earlier that I want to reiterate is like surprise is so important to me. I want to be surprised. I want my reader to be surprised, you know, and if I'm never surprised, then my reader's not going to be surprised. And so for me, like this way of playing with these unlike objects, these unlike nouns, and bringing them together, that's where the surprise happens. The chapter that I've been reading on tour from Deep Creek is the one that contains that can of UV protector and my mother washing the skirt. And so I've read it like 175 times in the last year, and out loud, which, you know, just by the way, makes you hate yourself. And yet, every single time I read that, I'm just a little happy. Like, I'm really happy that that skirt hung around for 30 years waiting to find that can of UV protector. It makes me happy. And I don't mean to say, like, it's great literature. I just mean to say it makes me happy, like, that those two metaphors found each other, you know? And that's the beauty of this method. That's the surprise of this method. All right. I think I'll pause right here and ask for questions because I don't want to run out of time. That is the main thing I have to say. But I can also talk about like where you go once you once you get to the next stage after you're playing with your glimmers and bringing them together. But I want to stop and see if there's any questions right now. Yeah.
When you're collecting your glimmers, do you actually just dump them in one giant Word document, or do you somehow like systematically put them in
Yeah, the question was, do I dump all my glimmers in a Word document, or do I have some kind of system for organizing them? And the answer is, you know, like having a system, I mean, first of all, you'd have to see my car or my house, but so it's not really like me to be organized. But so I'll just offer that as a disclaimer first. But I really do think that, you know, organizing them would kind of defeat the purpose of the whole thing I'm trying to do here. Like how would I organize them? You know, like red glimmers or like glimmers from 1974. You know what I mean? Like,
more of like, do you have like a note document that you just like literally start writing blurbs, or do you just?
What I have, and you know, this is like, don't be like me, but I mean, if I opened my computer and you looked at my desktop, you know, you might have a stroke. Like it makes people nervous to see it. Like I have like a zillion little pieces of nothing. Like some of them are in the same file. I probably have one file folder on my computer called Recent Glimmers that was probably started in like 2001. And then I have a million other little starts. There is no organization, but that's the beauty of search, right? Like that, for me, the randomness of it is part of the point, and the fact that if I'm starting something new and I just want to like browse through and see which glimmers want to come out to play, like the point is the browsing. You know, nobody said art should be fast, and so for me, like just looking through, like playing around, you know, looking at, like I see a document on my thing, and there's like 7 words that I wrote. I have no recollection of writing them, and I open it. And there's probably 2 paragraphs there, and I go, oh, that was a thing, yeah. You know, like browsing around is part of it to see which ones feel hot or which ones rise up. But it would be easy if you were a more organized person to put everything in one folder, because you can still search it, you know, search for blue or search for ice or search for elk or search for, you know, whatever. So to me, again, like, rooting around in them is part of the process, especially now that my memory's not so good. You know, I used to have a really crack memory, and I mean, I did for years and years, and so it's a really weird being me now, although I'm more in the present moment, I think. But I really do have to there's surprises all over the place because I have no memory of the things I wrote down, and so more so than ever, kind of milling around in there and going, oh yeah, that thing, oh that might work, you know, is part of the fun and part of the process. Yeah.
The process sounds to me a little bit like a tarot card reading or something like
I like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to talk about that or not.
Well, I like tarot, and I like I like anything that gives us a metaphorical window to see through, you know, and that's what tarot does. It's like, so if I have a story going and I start looking through glimmers to beef it up or to add to it, I'm like, okay, like what would holding this story on the other side of the lens of, you know, Nine of Swords be? You know, it's like that. It's you know, metaphors are windows that put a layer of meaning on what's already there, which is also made of windows. So, you know, tarot's an interesting way to think about it. I don't know enough about tarot to talk about it like intelligently, specifically, but what I know is if you get a good tarot reading from someone, you know, it always seems like it's exactly about your life right now. And that's the way these glimmers are the same. Like, I have a belief that I can make any glimmer work in any story. Not that I necessarily should, but I can, you know, like, so I can make any tarot card that I might draw on a day apply to my life right now. And I could make that ice bottle fit in any story, but it went nicely into the first one I tried. Sometimes not. That skirt's been hanging around for 35 years, but it finally found its story. So, and I could have made it work before, but it just didn't feel right, you know? Yeah.
Do you ever use, like, I like that you brought up the subconscious because it's super terrifying sometimes, but do you ever, like, have part of a memory because of that sort of fracture of things, and then you use that part because it's important, but then you kind of have to fill in around it to make it detailed?
Sure.
That way as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of memories are, especially traumatic memories, are partial, and that's honestly like why I wrote fiction for so long, or one reason. I mean, I'm trained as a fiction writer, and it was really hard in the memoir because I did take a kind of a vow with this that I was going to really try not to embellish. You know, I was really going to try to stick with the things I knew. I did that almost as an experiment because I don't really believe that language can represent reality. So I did it as an experiment. Like, what would happen if I really, really, really tried not to embellish or not to shape a story? You know, because my fiction is generally very autobiographial. So, but I'm shaping the story, making it a better story. With this, I was like, can't do that this time. And so it was hard, you know. And I would say things like, well, it's been 35 years and I can't remember exactly what was said, but it might have been something like this. You know, I tried to put that uncertainty right on the page, which is not something I've done before, but I tried to. But I do think, I think a couple of things about that. I think, you know, for me, and this might be more at your question, like writing the partial memory, the partial glimmer, and then putting it next to other glimmers that interact with it, sometime pull the rest of the memory through, right? Like even if that glimmer seems completely slant to what I'm telling, because my subconscious won't let me access the heart of the trauma, but it will remember the Gila monster or whatever it is over here that's like speaking to that traumatic memory, you know? So yeah, I do think it's a way in to access memory, or to, if you're writing fiction, to create a scene that, even if you can't remember, to create a scene that will absolutely carry the emotional heft of the memory, because your subconscious does remember. But maybe they're more comfortable putting it over here with the Gila monster, right? Yeah. Yes?
I think also impartiality. I think you said at the beginning that this has been your process from the get-go.
It has.
Have you loosened your reins a little bit? For instance, I've not read the Maggie story, but there wasn't any, it was the ice on the nose cone. You didn't yank in, and then there were red warning lights because you had to match the roses.
Oh,
like,
no.
Is it a trust that's kind of developed?
Well, I think I probably never would have had red warning lights. I mean, it's about, yeah, I mean, trust is totally the operative word. Trust is completely the operative word. And like the two things I say all the time until I'm blue in the face, not show don't tell, though I say that too. What I say is trust your metaphor, it knows more than you do. And what I find, and what I found from the beginning, this is not new, what I found from the beginning is so often the thing that really happened is the right thing. You know what I mean? Like there weren't any warning lights. And that was the right thing. You know what I mean? In this case. The other thing I say is trust your reader because they know more than you do. And that's what, you know, anytime you feel like you're just giving your reader a little recap in case they're not keeping up, cut it. I mean, I don't give too much direct advice, but anytime you're like, okay, I'm not sure the reader really understands, that's your own insecurity. That's going to make your reader want to hurl the book across the room. Don't do it. Or do it to make yourself feel better and then cut it. Anything else? Any other questions? Yeah.
When I was listening to you talk just now about the memory of the skirt and using it and so forth, I just wondered, does it ever lose its power with you? Is there any sense in which using it in a positive, creative way is redemptive, or is it just...
Oh, yeah. No, I think so. I mean, I think anytime you get the bad thing out from under the bed and up into the light, it's going to help you. You know, there's the... I mean, my therapy that I did, too much information, but my therapy I did is called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprogramming, and the whole theory behind that therapy is, you know, you get it out, you revisit it, you change the neural pathways so that you're now an adult and in control of the traumatizing thing. I mean, I'm making the skirt sound like it. My father broke my femur when I was 4, and I was in a 3/4 body cast for all of my 4th year. Like I did have actual trauma, not just the skirt washing. And partly because there was so much violence in my childhood is why that skirt scene is so powerful, because it's so nothing, but it represents all the ways that my mother didn't show up when my father was breaking my limbs. So it's a powerful scene, more powerful than it sounds. Besides, she just didn't like me the way I looked, which is also true. But I do think, you know, with EMDR, it's all about like telling it and retelling it and retelling it and retelling it. And that's the beauty of writing. Like we can write our traumas and then we have the benefit of doing 16 drafts. And it's very like the EMDR process. You revisit and revisit it and revisit it, and you're in control of it. And that is supposedly, you know, changes the neural pathways that got dug in the traumatic event. So absolutely. I mean, I do think it's therapeutic. I don't think that's the only reason to do it, but I think it is therapeutic for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, in relation to that, I felt like I recognized what you're saying about surprise, about being like you have to be surprised or the reader's not going to be surprised. So when you start to wade into a story, when you write stories, do you have a plot? Do you know the end point when you write the story, or how does that surprise thing work with pre-planning or like whatever?
Right. Yeah. The question is, do I have an end point or do I know the plot? And the answer is absolutely not. I don't want a plot. I mean, I'm not very good with plot anyway. I mean, plot isn't where I don't ever think about plot. Like, I remember Laurie Moore said, plots are for dead people. And I remember that from when I was a grad student, and it stays with me. In fact, the line was, plots are for dead people, ferret face. She was talking to her teacher in that story. You know, I just read a book that was heavily plotted, and I really enjoyed it. And I thought, there's the plot. That's what it's good for. So I'm not anti-plot. I don't care about it. And the reason I don't care about it, I mean, I definitely care about story arc, which I think is a different thing. I also care very much about narrative drive, which is sometimes confused with plot. And because of this glimmer method, I really can't think about plot because I don't know where I'm going, and I don't want to know where I'm going. I really don't. I can fix narrative drive at the end, or not at the end, but 2/3 of the way through revision. You know, I go back and I say, okay, this is flat here. Nothing's happening, you know. And I read a ton of student work, and I'm always like, okay, and we need some narrative drive. So I might be anti-plot, but I am not anti-narrative drive. And you know, and where does narrative drive come from? Like, who do we care about, and what do they care about? If I get to page 4 or 5 and I'm not worried about anything, you know, I'm out. I need to know what I'm worried about. So, and maybe we mean plot when we say that. I don't know. I grew up, you know, in minimalism and no plot, and you know, that's when I was a grad student. So I'm, you know, predisposed to not care about plot. But the fact is, you know, when I'm shaping a story toward the end of it, you know, it's got to go. It's got to go fast. It's got to drive. Now, plot is one way to do that, but I think also, I think there's a million ways to invite your reader in. And what I was saying earlier about cut that part where you're writing the stuff where you're giving your reader a little recap, you want your reader to be on their toes. You want your reader to have to pay attention, you know? And sometimes that takes the shape of experimental forms. Sometimes it takes the shape of like keeping a secret from them. Toni Morrison, greatest writer of the 20th century. She is a master at keeping a secret. So you're reading forward to find out, like, who was that voice that was talking to me on page 10? Is that a ghost, or is that the book itself? Like, you know, the beautiful thing about reading Toni Morrison is that she will always tell you what you were waiting to hear, but you might have to wait 150 pages, and that's so skillful. Like, to create narrative drive out of keeping a little secret, you know, that's not the same as plot, but it definitely creates narrative drive. So there's a lot of different ways to create narrative drive, which I think is so important. But to me, that's a later problem. Like, that's a revision problem. Like, how can I organize this, or what do I need to cut to make sure the narrative is still driving? But when I'm creating, when I'm drafting, it's really just about the nouns. It's just about getting the stuff together that's going to ping off each other in an interesting way. Yes?
Along those lines, you made a comment that these glimmers you have fallen out of a story, and I think that's interesting because it sounds like your process, as I'm understanding, is this tension of juxtaposition. So I'm kind of wondering, you know, not in general, but, you know, to be specific, the one you mentioned, how did that fall out of a story? It just didn't work anymore? It seemed to take the story a different direction? I mean, when you initially had a home for it, it sounded like, or thought it was going to work, and it didn't. So
yeah, I mean, that happens all the time, you know. Because of this method of throwing glimmers together, throwing anything together that feels like it might stick and make something interesting, there's going to be tons of mistakes. There's going to be tons of times when it doesn't work, right? There's going to be tons of times where I go, well, I thought, you know, the emu belonged with the, you know, national forest, but it doesn't, turns out, because there are no national forests with emus in them. So, and really, it can be like that. You know, like I think, oh, fruit bats and orcas. Well, no, they don't live together anywhere on Earth. I mean, it can be like that. So for me, there's all kinds of collateral damage. But again, you know, what I said a minute ago, you know, nobody said art was supposed to be fast. Like, that's a cultural misconception. So if I have to put like 36 glimmers in and only 10 of them remain, that's a good writing week for me. You know, like I found the ones that stuck. But I do think of it as, I see you, I do think of it as, you know, a sort of infinite number of pieces that can be combined in infinite ways, and I just have to find the best way. That's a good note to end on. Thank you.